Would you agree to spend the entire night alone in an abandoned hospital for $500? Sounds simple, doesn't it? Just walk through empty corridors, check a few doors, make sure no one breaks in. But what if I told you there's a place where doors shouldn't exist, and that what's on the other side might reveal truths about yourself that you've spent years trying to forget? Stay with me until the end, because what happened to Marcus Thompson that night will make you question everything you think you know about reality, memory, and the things we keep locked inside ourselves. Marcus was an ordinary man, a former paramedic, 34 years old, divorced, struggling with insomnia, and bills that kept piling up. When he saw the ad for a night watchman at St. Catherine Memorial Hospital, a gigantic building closed for 8 years in rural Ohio, he didn't think twice. $500 a night, just to make sure no one gets in. No questions asked, no experience required. Money too easy to be true, right? Have you ever accepted something like that, driven by desperation without questioning the details? On the first night, everything seemed normal. Dusty corridors, the smell of abandonment in the air, rusty stretchers leaning against the walls. Marcus walked with his flashlight, following the hospital floor plan that the security company had provided. 3rd floor, east wing, main corridor. But then he saw something that made his heart race. A heavy metal door with a rusted plate marked 237. He stopped. He checked the map. That space should only be a structural wall. The door didn't exist in any official building records. And here's the most disturbing part. When Marcus approached and touched the cold doorknob, he realized there was no lock on the outside. The door could only be opened from the inside. Then he heard it. Rhythmic beeps from heart monitors, the hum of medical equipment still functioning, and a weak, desperate voice calling from the other side. "Help! Please! Is anyone there?" What would you do in that moment? Open the door, run away? Marcus didn't know that his choice would reveal a secret buried for years, a truth he had erased from his own memory in order to survive. Because what was inside room 237 wasn't just impossible. Before I tell you what Marcus found on the other side of that door, I need to ask you something. If you're feeling that chill down your spine, if this story has already started to affect you in some way, please like this video. Now, seriously, it really helps to get this story to more people who also need to hear what comes next. And look, I know this kind of content isn't for everyone, but if you're still here with me, it's because something in this narrative is resonating with you, isn't it? Leave a comment below. Have you ever had that feeling that there's a door in your life that you're afraid to open? It could be a conversation you avoid, a truth you don't want to face, a memory you've buried deep inside. I read all the comments, truly, and often it's you who show me angles of this story that I hadn't even considered. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this kind of content that goes beyond superficial entertainment, you know? It's about stories that touch you deeply, that make you think about yourself. And if you're not already registered, subscribe to the channel, click the subscribe button, and activate the bell, because I bring you stories like this every week. Narratives that stir the mind, the heart, that make you question reality and look inward. You won't want to miss the next one, I guarantee. Now, back to Marcus in that dark 3rd floor hallway, my heart pounding in my chest and that pleading voice coming from inside room 237. He stood there paralyzed, his hand still resting on that cold doorknob, trying to process what he was hearing. Marcus Thompson wasn't the type of person who believed in the paranormal or in frightening coincidences. He was practical, rational, trained to handle emergencies, but nothing in his paramedic training had prepared him for that moment. To understand what happened that night, you need to know who Marcus really was and why he was there, alone, in an abandoned hospital that carried dark stories on its walls. Marcus had been one of Cleveland's best paramedics, dedicated, quick, efficient. For years he saved lives, raced against time, made impossible decisions while sirens blared in the background. But there's a weight that comes with that kind of work, an invisible burden that accumulates inside you. Every call answered, every person you couldn't save, every face etched in your memory even when you try to forget. and Marcus carried a specific weight, a guilt he could never fully name. Something had happened, an incident he rarely mentioned, that made him hang up his uniform and never return. The transformation was brutal, from a lifesaver to a man who could barely save himself. In the following years, his life crumbled like a house of cards. The marriage ended, the bills piled up, and insomnia became a constant companion. Marcus spent his nights awake, avoiding sleep because he knew what came with it. Nightmares, fragments of memories he preferred to keep buried. He needed money, yes, but more than that. He needed something to fill those empty hours of the early morning, something to prevent him from being alone with his own thoughts. That's when he saw the advertisement. Night watchman, St. Catherine Memorial Hospital, $500 a night. No experience necessary, no background check, no questions asked. The building had been closed for 8 years after a series of scandals involving medical negligence, preventable deaths, and lawsuits that were never fully resolved. Most people in the county avoided even going near the place. It had that heavy energy, you know, that kind of building that seems to hold more than just old furniture and broken equipment. But Marcus didn't mind. In fact, maybe it was exactly the kind of place that matched his state of mind at that moment. The security company that hired him was strangely vague. Just an envelope with keys, a map of the building, and simple instructions. Patrol every hour, ensure no one breaks in, report any anomalies. No in-person interviews, no direct supervisor. The money would be deposited every morning after his shift. Too easy, but Marcus was too desperate to question it. And perhaps deep down that's exactly what he was looking for. A job without human connections, without emotional responsibilities, without life or death decisions. Just him, empty hallways, and silence. But silence in abandoned places is never truly silence, is it? It carries echoes, whispers of everything that happened there before, and St. Catherine was no different. From the first night, Marcus felt it, that feeling of being watched, that the walls held secrets that wanted to be told. He tried to ignore it, focusing only on mechanical tasks, checking doors, noting schedules, walking through corridors illuminated only by his flashlight. But there was something about that place that affected him in a way he couldn't explain. It was as if the hospital were waiting specifically for him, as if each step he took inevitably led him to that third-floor hallway, to that door that shouldn't exist. When Marcus finally mustered the courage to try and open room 237, he realized he needed to understand the place better before making any decisions. He took a few steps back, took a deep breath, and decided to do what he should have done from the start. A thorough and meticulous patrol, paying attention to every detail. Because something in that hospital was deeply wrong, and the mysterious door was just the tip of a much more disturbing iceberg. The first thing Marcus noticed as he retraced his steps was the dust. Thick layers covered the cracked linoleum floor, accumulated over 8 years of neglect. But there, right in the middle of the main hallway on the second floor, were footprints, recent footprints, clear marks from athletic shoes, as if someone had walked there in the last few hours. Marcus felt his heart race. He followed the footprints with his flashlight, tracking each ghostly step until they simply stopped. They didn't turn towards a door, they didn't gradually disappear. They ended abruptly in the middle of the hallway, as if whoever had been there had simply evaporated. This revelation sent a chill down his spine. Was he really alone there? He continued his rounds, trying to convince himself there was a rational explanation. Perhaps they were old footprints he hadn't noticed before. Perhaps the dust had settled unevenly. The human mind is incredible in how it tries to protect us from fear, creating logical narratives for the inexplicable. But the next discovery destroyed any attempt at rationalization. On the third floor, West Wing, Marcus found a wheelchair positioned near a window. He clearly remembered seeing that same chair on the first floor during his previous round, leaning against a different wall. The characteristic rust on the left armrest was unmistakable. How had it moved? Marcus checked his notes and verified the time. Only 40 minutes had passed since he last went to the first floor. He ran back, descending the stairs 2 steps at a time, his flashlight swaying wildly. When he reached the spot where he had Originally seen the chair, the space was empty. Only the mark in the dust showed that something had been there recently. He climbed back up to the third floor, breathless, and the chair was still there, in the same position, as if waiting for him. Marcus's mind began to waver. He was a man of science, of logic, but how could he explain objects moving on their own in a locked building? And then there was the sound, that damned constant sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. It was like mechanical breathing, rhythmic, deep, the kind of sound you hear in ICUs, the incessant whisper of ventilators keeping someone alive. Marcus knew that sound well. He had spent years working alongside those machines, rocking patients to the rhythm of that artificial respiration. But here in the abandoned St. Catherine, with no electricity, no patients, no life, the sound continued. Persistent, ghostly. He tried to locate the source, pressing his ear against walls, opening. Doors to empty rooms. The more he searched, the further the sound seemed to recede, as if toying with him, mocking his determination to find a logical explanation. The journey through the dark corridors became a kind of macabre dance between Marcus and the secrets of that place. Each step took him deeper into the mystery. Each discovery eroded his sanity a little more. The feeling of being watched became unbearable. It wasn't paranoia. Marcus was sure of it. He felt invisible eyes following his. Every move, a constant presence in the shadows that the flashlight couldn't reach. How many times have you felt that? That absolute certainty that you're not alone, even when all your senses tell you otherwise. It's a primitive instinct, something our ancestors developed to survive. And Marcus's instincts were screaming at him to get out of there immediately. But he didn't leave. Perhaps out of stubbornness, perhaps because he needed those $500, or perhaps because deep down he was searching for something. An answer, a revelation, a confrontation with something greater than his own worldly concerns. It was with this mixture of fear and determination that Marcus turned into the east corridor of the third floor and saw for the first time a heavy, dark grey metal door with a rusted plate marked simply 237. He stopped. He picked up the map provided by the security company, unfolded the paper. He stared under the flashlight. His fingers trembled as he traced the layout. Of the third floor. That space exactly where the door was should have been just a structural wall. There was no room, no space, nothing. The impact of this discovery was like a punch to the gut. And if you're still here with me now, witnessing every second of this transformation of Marcus's reality, then you already understand that this isn't just his story, but the story of all of us who carry locked doors within our souls. Because the door was there, real, solid, impossible. And on the other side, Marcus was about to discover something that would challenge everything he thought he knew about that place and about himself. He approached slowly, each step deliberate, as if walking on sacred or cursed ground. He didn't yet know which. The 237 sign was covered in a thin layer of rust, but the numbers were unmistakable. Marcus reached out and touched the metal surface. Icy, so cold it burned, as if absorbing all the surrounding heat. He pulled out the map again, unfolding the paper under. The dim light of the flashlight, checking for the third, fourth, fifth time. His fingers trembled as he traced the lines of the third floor. Room 235, room 236, then nothing. Structural wall, support area. There shouldn't be a room 237, but there it was, defying architectural plans, defying logic, defying reality itself. The decision Marcus faced at that moment was simple and yet impossible. Try to open it or leave. Part of him screamed to go down those stairs, walk out the front door, and never look back. $500 wasn't worth his sanity. But another part, the part that had made him a paramedic years ago, the part that ran towards danger when everyone else fled, that part needed to know, needed to understand. The transformation from fear to curiosity happened in seconds, and Marcus reached for the doorknob. He tried to turn it. Nothing. Locked. He applied more force, feeling the cold metal against the palm of his hand. The door didn't budge an inch. Marcus stepped back, studying the door more carefully. And that's when he noticed something that made his stomach churn. There was no lock, absolutely none. The doorknob was completely smooth, with no keyhole, no visible locking mechanism. How could a door be locked without a lock? The revelation came like a bolt of lightning. The door could only be opened from the inside out. That detail changed everything. It meant that someone, or something, had designed that room specifically to keep something inside. Or someone. Marcus felt the impact of this understanding like a physical weight on his chest. He placed his hands flat against the cold metal, trying to feel any vibration, any sign of life on the other side. And it was when he pressed his ear against the cold surface that his journey took a turn from which there would be no return. Beeps, rhythmic, mechanical. The unmistakable sound of heart monitors, that electronic pulse Marcus had heard thousands of times in ambulances and emergency rooms. 60 beats per minute, regular, constant. And along with the beeps, the characteristic hum of medical equipment, the whisper of ventilators, the murmur of machines keeping someone alive. But how? The hospital had been without power for 8 years. There was no electricity, no generators working. And yet, on the other side of that impossible door, an entire room of medical equipment was operating perfectly. Marcus stepped away from the door, his breath quickening, trying to process what he was hearing. Perhaps it was pipes, perhaps the wind creating acoustic illusions through old ventilation ducts. His mind raced through every possible rational explanation, each weaker than the last. And then he heard the voice. Weak, distant, but unmistakably human. A woman's voice heavy with despair and exhaustion. "Help, please. Is anyone there?" Marcus froze. Every muscle in his body tensed as if he'd received an electric shock. He knew that voice. No, that was impossible. It had to be his. Imagination, the tiredness, the stress. He pressed his ear against the door again, his heart pounding in his chest so hard he could barely hear anything else. "Please, it's been so long. Are you real? Has someone finally come?" The voice was real. There was someone trapped on the other side of that door, in a room that shouldn't exist, surrounded by equipment that shouldn't be functioning, in a hospital abandoned for almost a decade. Marcus's mindset, built on years of training and logic, began to crumble. He banged on the door with his fist 3 times hard. "Hey, I'm here! Can you hear me?" he shouted, his voice echoing down the empty hallway. Silence. The beeps continued, impassive. The buzzing of the machines remained constant. But the voice did not answer. Marcus tapped again, harder, the metallic sound reverberating like a war drum. "I'm going to get you out of there. Hold on tight." He looked around desperately, searching for something, anything he could use to break. Down the door. His hands trembled not only with fear, but with a visceral urgency, that life-saving impulse he thought he'd left behind along with his paramedic career. In that moment, all the years of training came rushing back. All the instincts resurfaced. Someone needed help, and he couldn't just walk away. But as he ran through the corridors searching for tools, a thought began to form in the back of his mind, a terrible suspicion he wasn't yet ready to confront. That voice, that damned voice, he knew it from somewhere deep and painful in his memory. And if you're still here with me, breathing along with me, Marcus, feeling every beat of his heart, thought, then you need to subscribe to this channel now, because what's about to happen is going to turn everything upside down. The hidden truth behind room 237 was closer to Marcus than he could ever have imagined. When he finally found a crowbar in an abandoned maintenance room on the first floor, Marcus knew he had crossed an invisible line. There was no turning back. He ran up the stairs, the heavy metal of the tool banging against his leg with every step, his panting breath echoing off the empty walls. Adrenaline coursed through his veins like in the old days when he responded to emergency calls. But this time it was different. This time something inside him whispered that the person he was about to meet would change everything. He stopped in front of door 237, sweat dripping down his forehead despite the cold. Emanating from the metal, Marcus knocked again 3 times, hard and deliberate. "Hey, you in there? I'm going to get you out of there, you hear me? Hold on tight." The voice answered so faintly that he could barely hear it over the constant beeping. "I've been here for so long, I can't get out. Are you real?" The question struck Marcus like an arrow. Are you real? What kind of person trapped in a room asks that question? What kind of isolation, what kind of despair drives someone to question their own reality? He felt a deep connection to those words, because he himself had spent years questioning his own existence, his own sanity. The transformation from spectator to active participant was complete. He was no longer just a security guard fulfilling a shift. He was what he had always been, someone who ran towards danger to save lives. "I'm real. I'm going to get you out of there right now." Marcus began to position the crowbar against the door, searching for a crack, a weak point. But then he realized he needed help. He needed to call emergency services, the police, someone. He took his cell phone from his pocket, his hands trembling. No signal. Completely dead. Impossible. He had a signal when he entered. He had checked. He ran down the hallway, raising the phone in the air, searching for a bar, any indication of a connection. Nothing. Panic began to tear at the edges of his carefully constructed mindset. Marcus stumbled down the stairs, almost falling in his haste, and ran to the reception desk where he had seen an old landline phone. He grabbed the device, put it to his ear. Dead silence. Not even a dial tone. The line was completely dead. He slammed the phone on the hook repeatedly, as if that would magically restore the connection. Nothing. The isolation was complete. Okay, Marcus thought, forcing rationality over the growing fear. He would simply leave the building, run to the nearest gas station, and call from there. Decision made, he turned toward the main glass doors through which he had entered hours before. He pushed. Nothing. He pushed harder. The doors didn't budge an inch. He looked down, and his stomach dropped. The security bars were locked in the closed position, secured from the inside with heavy padlocks that definitely hadn't been there when he entered. Marcus pulled at the padlocks with all his might, the metal cutting his palms. They wouldn't budge. He ran for the side emergency exits, also locked. Back door, locked. Every possible exit had been sealed, and the impact of this discovery was devastating. He was trapped inside an abandoned hospital with an impossible room and a ghostly voice calling for help. And somehow, it felt intentional, as if someone or something wanted to ensure he couldn't escape what he was about to discover. True panic then set in, that primal feeling of being hunted, of being trapped in a dead end. Marcus pounded on the glass doors with his fists, yelling for help, knowing there was no one to hear. The journey that had begun as a simple night job had turned into a living nightmare. But amidst the panic, a calmer voice emerged in his mind, the voice of the professional he had been. If he couldn't get out, if he was trapped there anyway, then the only option was to move forward, to discover the truth, to free whoever was trapped in that room. He returned to the third floor, the crowbar firmly gripped, determination replacing fear. Marcus stopped in front of door 237, positioned the tool at the junction between the door and the frame. He took a deep breath. This was the decision that would define everything. On the other side of that door was a revelation he wasn't prepared to face, but perhaps one he'd needed to confront for years. "Okay," he said loudly, both to the person inside and to himself. "I'm going to break down this door now. Step aside, okay?" He applied pressure, his muscles tensing. He was about to force it open when something extraordinary happened. The door made a soft mechanical click and began to open on its own. Just a crack, maybe 10 centimeters. Marcus froze, the crowbar still in his hand, watching in disbelief as the impossible door, which had no lock on the outside, simply swung open before him. Icy air escaped through the crack, so cold it formed a visible fog in the heated hallway. And along with the air came a smell Marcus knew intimately. Hospital antiseptic, that characteristic chemical odor of operating rooms and ICUs. But there was something more, something underlying. The smell of a place where time had stopped, where life was suspended in a limbo between existing and not existing. Through the crack, fluorescent lights flickered erratically, casting dancing shadows. Marcus could only see fragments, a corner of chromed medical equipment, the reflection of lit monitors, the movement of something that might be curtains. The beeps continued, undisturbed, marking the heartbeats of someone who shouldn't be. There. With a trembling hand, Marcus pushed the door open slowly, and what his eyes saw when it opened completely defied every fiber of logic that still remained in his mind. The room was immaculate. There was no dust, no signs of neglect, no trace of the 8 years the hospital had supposedly been closed. The walls were a pristine clinical white. The linoleum floor gleamed as if it had been waxed that morning. Medical monitors blinked with green and blue lights, displaying heart rate, oxygen levels, blood pressure, everything functioning perfectly. An IV dripped from a clear bag through a thin tube connected to a pale arm. The air was frigid, kept that way by a subtly humming air conditioning system, impossible in a building without electricity. It was as if Marcus had stepped through a portal into a parallel dimension, where time had followed a completely different path. In the center of the room was a hospital bed with perfectly arranged white sheets, and lying on that bed, connected to a complex network of wires and tubes, was a woman. She was around 30 years old, her skin as pale as porcelain, her brown hair spread across the pillow. Her eyes were closed, her chest rising and falling in a mechanical rhythm dictated by the ventilator beside the bed. She seemed to be sleeping, suspended somewhere between life and death, between the present and the past. Marcus stepped into the room, his legs trembling, feeling as if he were walking in a dream, or perhaps a nightmare from which he wouldn't be able to wake up. His gaze swept over the equipment, professionally cataloguing each piece of gear out of sheer habit, until his eyes landed on the identification board attached to the foot of the bed. It was one of those simple whiteboards where doctors and nurses write down patient information. He approached, almost breathless, and read the words written there in clear, meticulous handwriting. Name, Sarah Thompson. Date of admission, March 15, 2016. Diagnosis, trauma-induced coma. Responsible party, Marcus Thompson. The world stopped, completely. Marcus's blood ran cold in his veins. His heart forgot how to beat for an interminable moment. Sarah Thompson. That was Sarah, his ex-wife, the same Sarah he was absolutely certain was living in Seattle, working as a pediatric nurse, who had divorced him 5 years ago and moved on with her life. The Sarah who sent occasional messages on his birthday, who had attended his father's funeral 2 years ago, who was real, alive, existing somewhere far away. But there she was, or someone identical to her, lying motionless in a hospital bed that shouldn't exist, in a senseless coma. Marcus felt his legs give way and fell to his knees beside the bed. With trembling hands he touched her face. Cold skin, but not dead. Alive. Real. He could feel her weak pulse in her neck, could see her eyelids trembling slightly as if she were dreaming. The revelation began to form in his mind, like pieces of a puzzle fitting together, but each piece that connected made the image more disturbing. March 15, 2016. That date was etched into his memory like a scar. It was the day of the accident. The day everything changed. Marcus and Sarah were paramedics working the same shift when they received a call about a multiple vehicle accident on Highway 71. They arrived at the scene first and began administering aid, and then a fleeing driver, trying to escape the police, lost control and... Marcus pressed his palms against his eyes, trying to block out the memories that came rushing in. He remembered Sarah being hit, remembered the horrible sound of metal against flesh, remembered screams and blood and carrying her to the ambulance. He remembered doctors rushing around, code blues being shouted in the corridors of St. Catherine Memorial. He remembered sitting in a waiting room, covered in her blood, while a doctor explained the gravity of the situation. And then, after that, everything became hazy. As if someone had erased parts of his memory and filled in the blanks with a different narrative. He was sure Sarah had survived. He was sure she had recovered after months of rehabilitation. He was sure they had divorced because the experience had changed them, because neither of them could look at each other anymore without reliving that trauma. He was sure she had moved to Seattle and started a new life. But what if none of this was true? What if it was just a story his mind had created to protect him from a truth too painful to bear? The impact of this possibility was like being hit by a train. Marcus looked around the room, truly seeing for the first time. The equipment was from 2016, models that were already being replaced at the time. The calendar on the wall showed March 2016. There was a coat hanging on a hook, his coat, the same one he had worn that night almost a decade ago. Marcus's mindset, carefully constructed over years of denial, began to crumble like a building, imploding. That room didn't exist in the present. It was a frozen fragment of the past, or perhaps it existed only in his own mind, a psychological prison where he kept Sarah alive because he couldn't accept the truth. The truth. The decisions he had made that terrible night, the consequences he had fled from, were all there in the room with him, waiting to be confronted. I sense that you're still here, witnessing this devastating transformation. So you understand that this journey isn't just Marcus's, but all of ours who construct alternative realities to escape unbearable pain. Subscribe to this channel because what comes next will reveal the deepest truth of all, the decision Marcus was forced to make and that he spent years trying to forget. Marcus held Sarah's cold hand, and it was when he touched her skin that the repressed memories began to return in full force, each one hitting his consciousness like violent waves crashing against rocks. He saw it all again, but this time, without the filters, without the protective distortions his mind had built. The call came at 10:47 p.m. on March 15, 2016. Multiple accident on Highway 71, several victims, request for all available units. Marcus was driving, Sarah beside him checking the equipment, while the siren ripped through the night. They arrived first on the scene, as they always did. They were the best, the fastest, the most dedicated. Sarah jumped out of the ambulance before Marcus had even fully parked, running towards the wrecked vehicles. Marcus could see her now, vivid as if it were happening again. Her hair tied in a ponytail, her uniform impeccable, that determination in her eyes that he had always loved. She was kneeling beside a man trapped in the wreckage when it happened. A black Dodge Charger appeared out of nowhere, pursued by the police, the driver completely out of control. Marcus screamed. He screamed her name so loudly that his throat bled, but there was no time. The car swerved to avoid a police car and hit Sarah from the side, the impact so violent that it threw her 6 meters into the air. The world went into slow motion. Marcus saw her body spinning, disarticulated, saw the exact moment she hit the asphalt, saw the blood starting to spread. And then the training kicked in, that automatic mode paramedics develop to function even when the world is falling apart. He ran, assessed the damage, began the procedures. Severe head trauma, internal bleeding, multiple fractures. She was dying right there in front of him, and there was nothing he could do beyond the basics. Other ambulances arrived. They stabilized her enough to transport her. Marcus insisted on going with her, holding her hand the entire way to St. Catherine Memorial, whispering promises he didn't know if he could keep. "Stay with me, Sarah, please stay with me. You'll be okay, I promise." At the hospital, Marcus remembered now with crystal clarity. Surgeons worked for 7 hours. He stood outside the operating room covered in her blood, refusing to clean up, refusing to leave. Other paramedics came, colleagues brought coffee, supervisors tried to convince him to go home. He wouldn't budge. When the surgeon finally came out, the expression on his face said it all before any words were spoken. She was alive, technically. Her heart was beating, her lungs were breathing with mechanical assistance. But her brain had suffered massive trauma, severe swelling, damage to critical areas. They put her in an induced coma to give her brain time to recover, if that was even possible. Days passed, weeks. The doctors began using words like persistent vegetative state, irreversible brain damage, quality of life. And then came the question that completely destroyed Marcus. You are the closest spouse. You need to make a decision. The machines can keep her alive indefinitely, but the tests show minimal brain activity. There is no real expectation of recovery. Do you understand what we are saying? Marcus remembered sitting in that same room, 237, holding Sarah's hand exactly as he was doing now, facing the most impossible decision a human being can face. Turning off the machines meant letting her go, accepting that the woman he loved was gone and that only her body remained. But keeping them on meant what? Hope? Or just prolonging the inevitable? Keeping her trapped in a limbo between existing and not existing? He couldn't do it. He couldn't sign the papers. He couldn't be the one to make that decision. So Marcus did something his rational mind knew was impossible, but his desperate heart needed to believe. He created an alternate reality. One where Sarah woke up, slowly recovered, where they tried to make the marriage work, but the trauma was too much. One where she filed for divorce, moved to Seattle, moved on. A reality where she was alive, happy, existing somewhere far from him, but existing nonetheless. His mind constructed this narrative with such detail that he was able to live it as truth. Birthday messages that were never sent, casual encounters that never happened, an entire life that existed only in his imagination. Because it was either that or accept that he had failed. That the woman he loved was trapped in a hospital bed because of a decision he didn't have the courage to make. And now there it was, the truth. Sarah never left that bed. She had been there for almost a decade, suspended in a coma, kept alive by machines, waiting for a decision Marcus never managed to make. The impact of this revelation was devastating. Everything he thought he knew about the past few years was a carefully constructed lie. His entire journey since that day had been an elaborate escape from the only truth that mattered. But before he could fully process it, the monitors around the room began to flicker erratically, the fluorescent lights above flickering in a chaotic pattern that followed no electrical logic. The beeps from the heart monitor sped up, slowed down, sped up again, as if reality itself were having a seizure. Marcus sat up startled, looking around, trying to understand what was happening, when a static sound cut through the silence. The intercom on the wall, one of those old hospital communication systems, crackled to life. Marcus stared at it, his heart racing. No one had used that system for years. There was no power to run it. But there it was, hissing with static, and then a voice emerged. A voice he knew intimately because it was his own, but distorted, as if being reproduced through water or by someone poorly imitating his inflections. "You never signed the papers, Marcus. You never let her go." The words echoed through the clinic room, each syllable carrying a weight of accusation and truth. Marcus staggered back, hitting the wall, his wide eyes fixed on the intercom. How? How could his own voice be speaking to him? And then, like a flash of understanding illuminating an entire landscape in a single devastating instant, everything fell into place. The hospital wasn't abandoned, not in the way he thought. He was in a time loop, a psychological prison created by his own guilt and inability to accept the truth. The revelation came in layers, each more disturbing than the last. How many times had he accepted this job? How many nights had he walked these corridors, found room 237, seen Sarah, confronted the memories, and then fled again? The job advertisement that seemed too good to be true, the absence of background checks, the payment that never arrived because it never needed to. It was all part of the cycle. Marcus pressed his hands against his temples, fragments of other nights beginning to bleed into his consciousness. He remembered now, or thought he remembered, having been here before, having seen this same room, held this same cold hand, confronted this same truth. But every time, instead of doing what needed to be done, he found a way to escape, to reset, to return to the comfortable, false reality he had constructed. And then, weeks or months later, something would pull him back. A job advertisement would appear, he would accept it without question, and the cycle would begin again. The mindset that kept Marcus functioning began to completely crumble. He wasn't a security guard on a shift. He was a soul trapped in his own personal hell, condemned to relive the same night repeatedly until he finally found the courage to do what needed to be done. St. Catherine Memorial No longer existed, not in physical form. Perhaps it had been demolished years ago. Perhaps it was still there, but truly empty. It didn't matter. The hospital where Marcus was existed only in his psyche, a physical manifestation of his refusal to accept and let go. And what about room 237? The room that didn't appear on any architectural plans, that had no lock on the outside, that could only be opened from the inside. That room existed only in his mind because it was where he kept Sarah alive. It was his last refuge, the secret place in his consciousness where she still breathed, still had a chance, was still waiting for him. The room wasn't on the plans because it wasn't a physical place. It was psychological, emotional, spiritual, a space Marcus had created so he wouldn't have to face the most difficult decision of his life. The impact of this understanding brought Marcus to his knees again. Tears began to stream down his face, years of denial crumbling at once. He looked at Sarah, really looked, and for the first time in almost a decade allowed himself to see the truth. She wasn't sleeping. She wasn't waiting to wake up. She had been gone for a long time, and only the machines maintained an illusion of life. The body was there, functioning mechanically, but Sarah, the woman who laughed at his bad jokes, who danced in the kitchen while cooking, who saved lives with the same dedication with which she breathed, that Sarah had left on the night of March 15th, 2016. And he had spent all those years trapped in denial, creating alternate realities, living in time loops, anything to avoid the only truth that mattered. He needed to let her go. The decisions we avoid don't simply disappear. They accumulate, gain weight, create elaborate prisons where we remain trapped until we finally find the courage to confront them. Marcus had built such a convincing prison that he truly believed he was living a normal life, when in reality he was trapped in a single moment, frozen in time, reliving the same trauma endlessly. The voice on the intercom spoke again, softer this time, almost gentle. "It's time, Marcus. It's time to sign the papers. It's time to let her rest." He knew it was true. I knew this cycle would only end when he finally did what he had been avoiding for almost 10 years. The journey that brought him here, through ghostly corridors and impossible doors, had only one possible destination. Marcus slowly rose, wiped away his tears, and for the first time in years, allowed himself to make the choice that would change everything. He walked to the side of the bed, looking at Sarah's pale face, and then his legs gave way. He fell to his knees, his body shaking with sobs that came from a place so deep he didn't even know existed. Holding her cold hand in his, Marcus finally found the words he had kept for almost a decade. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. I'm so sorry." His voice came out broken, hoarse from years of silence. "I should have let you rest. I should have been strong enough to do what was right, but I couldn't. I couldn't accept that you were gone, so I kept you here, trapped in this place, trapped by these machines, trapped by my own cowardice." Tears fell onto the white sheets, staining the fabric. "You deserved peace, you deserved rest, and I denied you that because I was too weak to let you go." It was the first time in all these years that Marcus spoke the truth aloud, unfiltered, without denial, without the protective armor he had built around his heart. And the moment the words came out, something extraordinary happened. The equipment around the bed began to slow down, not abruptly, not chaotically, but gently, as if they were finally being given permission to stop. The beeping of the heart monitor, which had been ticking constantly for so long, slowed down, more spaced out, like a tired heart finally allowed to rest. Marcus looked through the tears, and his eyes widened. Sarah was opening her eyes. For the first time. Since that terrible night, her eyelids fluttered and parted, revealing brown eyes he knew so well. But these were not the eyes of someone trapped in a coma. They were conscious, alive, and carried an expression that broke and healed Marcus's heart simultaneously. There was no accusation in those eyes, no anger or resentment, only kindness, only understanding, only love. Her lips moved, and a faint voice like a whisper carried by the wind reached him. "Everything's fine, Marcus. Everything's fine now." He squeezed her hand tighter, more tears falling. "I didn't want to let you go. I couldn't. I know." Her smile was small but genuine. "But you can now. You can let me go." The transformation that took place in Marcus at that moment was profound. Years of guilt, years of denial, years of living in self-imposed prisons, all began to dissolve. He understood that holding on wasn't love. Keeping someone imprisoned, even in memory or in machines, wasn't honoring them. True love, the most difficult and pure kind, was letting go when it was time. His hands trembling so much he could barely control them, Marcus looked around the room and saw what he needed to do. There, beside the bed, was the ventilator that kept Sarah's lungs functioning. A simple red button marked off. How many times had doctors shown him that button? How many times had they gently explained that pressing that button wasn't killing, that it was allowing nature to take its course? And how many times had he refused, run away, created alternative realities to avoid that decision? "I love you, Sarah. I will always love you," he said, his voice firm for the first time. "I know, and it's time for you to live again, to truly live. Promise me you'll try." Marcus nodded, unable to speak. He leaned down and kissed her forehead, feeling the cool skin beneath his lips. Then, with a courage he didn't know he possessed, he reached out and pressed the red button. The constant hum of the ventilator began to slow, the mechanical rhythm of her breathing gradually ceasing. The heart monitor continued for a few more moments, the beeps becoming less and less frequent, until finally the last one came. A final sigh that wasn't really a sigh. A final beep that echoed through the room. And then silence. A deep, complete silence, not threatening or empty, but peaceful, like the silence that comes after a storm, when everything finally calms down. Marcus remained kneeling beside the bed, holding the hand. That was now truly lifeless, and he wept. But these were different tears. They weren't tears of denial or despair. They were tears of acceptance, of release, of a true farewell. The room around him began to shift, the edges blurred, as if seen through fog. The clinical white walls began to disappear, the medical equipment becoming transparent like ghosts. The light itself seemed to be dissolving, the reality of this psychological prison finally unraveling now that its purpose had been served. Marcus felt as if he were being pulled back, through layers of consciousness, through time, back to where he truly belonged. He blinked, once, twice, and when his eyes opened again, he was no longer in room 237. He was sitting in the driver's seat of his old pickup truck, parked in an empty lot. The sun was rising on the horizon, painting the sky was a mix of pink and orange hues. Marcus looked around, disoriented. Ahead of him stood St. Catherine Memorial Hospital, but not the hospital he had spent the night exploring. This one was truly abandoned. Windows broken, graffiti on the walls, heavy chains locking the main doors. There were no lights, no guards, no security personnel. Just an old, forgotten building waiting to be demolished. Marcus looked at the passenger seat and his heart stopped. There lay a yellowed envelope, worn with age, its edges folded and stains that looked years old. With trembling hands, he picked up the envelope and opened it slowly, as if unwrapping something sacred. Inside were documents he recognized immediately. Medical authorization forms for discontinuing life support, dated March 23, 2016, exactly 8 days after the accident. The pages were yellowed, the letters slightly faded, but there, on the bottom line of each page, was his signature. The handwriting was undoubtedly his, but he didn't remember writing it. Or perhaps he did remember, but he had buried that memory so deeply that it had become unrecognizable. He touched the signature with his fingers, tracing the curves of his own name, and suddenly it all made sense. He had signed the papers. 8 years ago, in some moment of lucidity amidst unbearable pain, he had made the right choice. But afterward, unable to live with the weight of that decision, his mind had created an alternate narrative, one where Sarah was alive, where he had never made that decision, where he wasn't responsible for letting her go. And that narrative had become so real that he lived within it for almost a decade, creating false memories, building an entire life based on denial. The journey through room 237 hadn't been about making the decision for the first time. It had been about finally accepting the decision he'd already made years ago. It was about forgiving himself for being strong enough to do the unthinkable when necessary. Marcus carefully folded the papers and placed them back in the envelope, feeling as if a 1,000-pound weight had been lifted from his shoulders. For the first time in years, he could breathe fully. He glanced at the clock on the dashboard. 7:15 in the morning. The day was beginning. A new day that he would truly live instead of merely existing through. Marcus started the truck's engine, but before leaving the parking lot, he knew there was a place he needed to go, a place he had avoided for a long time. 20 minutes later, he stood before the gates of Greenwood Memorial Cemetery, his hands sweaty on the steering wheel. He hadn't been here since the funeral, since that hazy day that had almost completely blanked his mind. Marcus parked and walked slowly between the rows of tombstones, his steps heavy on the dew-damp grass. He knew exactly where she was, even if he didn't consciously remember being there before. Some things are etched deeper than conscious memory. And there, under an ancient oak tree that offered gentle shade, was the grey granite tombstone with simple lettering, Sarah Thompson. 1986-2016, beloved wife, dedicated paramedic, rest in peace. He stood there for a long moment, just staring, allowing reality to finally sink in completely. Sarah was dead. Not in Seattle, not living a new life, but here, resting beneath the earth for 8 years. And that was okay, you had to be okay. Marcus knelt on the grass, feeling the dampness seep into his trousers, and for the first time allowed himself to truly be present in that moment of grief he had avoided for so long. He had stopped at a flower shop along the way and bought a bouquet of yellow flowers, sunflowers and daisies, Sarah's favorites. She always said that yellow flowers were joy captured in petals. Marcus carefully placed the bouquet against the gravestone, arranging each flower with attention, as if the delicacy could somehow reach her wherever she was now. "Hi, Sarah," he said softly, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry it took me so long to really come here. I was stuck, you know, stuck in a room that didn't exist, in a time that wasn't real, in a version of reality I created because I couldn't accept this one." He ran his hand through the grass beside the gravestone. "But I'm here now. And I'm ready to say goodbye. A real goodbye this time." The tears came again. But they were different. They were clean, cathartic, healing. Marcus stood there for almost an hour, just talking to her, recounting the lost years, asking for forgiveness, offering forgiveness to himself, finally letting go. And when he stood up, his legs stiff from years of kneeling, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not happiness yet, perhaps not for a while, but peace. The quiet acceptance that some things end, some people leave, and that's part of the human journey. Marcus understood at that moment that room 237 had never existed in any architectural plan because it wasn't a physical place. It was the psychological space where the truths we cannot face reside, the ghosts we carry silently, the farewells that we never managed to say out loud. We all have our own versions of room 237, those secret rooms in our minds where we keep things too painful to process, and sometimes the door to those rooms can only be opened from the inside because only we ourselves can choose to walk through it, face what's on the other side, and finally move on. As Marcus walked back to his truck, the first full rays of sunlight warming his face, he knew the journey was only beginning. Not the journey of escape or denial, but the real journey of living again, of honoring Sarah's memory by living the life she would have wanted him to live. And for the first time in 8 years, he felt that this was possible. If you've made it this far with me, to this final moment in Marcus's story, then you understand that this was never just about him. It was about all of us, about the rooms we lock inside ourselves, about the doors we can only open when we are truly ready. Each of us carries some version of room 237, some place where we keep the truths that hurt too much, the decisions we avoid, the goodbyes we never manage to fully say. Leave a comment here saying, "I'm with you until the end," if you've truly made it to this point. I read every comment, and I'm moved seeing how many people connect with these stories in such a profound way. And you know, if this narrative touched you in any way, if it made you think about your own locked doors or unfaced truths, leave a like on this video. Not for the algorithm or for numbers, but because you and I shared something real here in the last few minutes. A connection through a story that speaks about being human, about fighting, about finally finding courage. And if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, now's the time. Because I regularly bring you stories like this, narratives that go beyond superficial entertainment and touch on something deeper. Stories that make you feel, think, and question. Click the subscribe button because you deserve more content. Like this in your life. There's a video over here that perfectly complements this topic, a story about second chances and what happens when we finally face our greatest fears. Click and continue with me there, because this journey we started together today doesn't have to end here. Until the next story, and remember, only you can open the most important doors in your life.